Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Attack, fortifying against the latest ransomware threats with DRaaS. Today's webinar is sponsored by DataPrise and Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. I am Keith Ward, and I am with Actual Tech Media, as you might have surmised, and I'm truly thrilled to be your moderator for this special event today. But before we get to this great content, we have a few housekeeping items I need to cover to help you get the most out of this session. Okay, first up, we want your questions. We'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation to go over some of the top questions that you ask. So keep those questions coming throughout the presentation today. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. Now, the first thing you want to do if you can't hear something or see something, if slides aren't advancing, is a quick browser refresh. Now, it may take a couple of refreshes, but once you do that, everything should kind of fix itself. If it doesn't, let us know in that questions tab, and we will hop right on it and help you out. Second, we have some great free downloads for you in the handout section, which is next to your questions tab. I'd especially like to call your attention to three amazing resources: a guide to DataPrise managed data protection, a checklist for creating a disaster recovery plan, and a CIO's guide to disaster recovery planning. Now, that is what I call a haul. Again, all of those resources are free and available to download in the handout section, so go there now. You'll also find there a link to our ATM Decisions group, which is a panel of IT decision makers that you can apply to join to participate in more in-depth events and other opportunities. There you'll also see a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events. Okay. Third, at the end of this event, we're going to be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you joining us today. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of that prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with all the boring details and all the legalese right there. And finally, one of the best advantages of this event or any of our Actual Tech Media events is the ability to ask questions of our expert presenters. Now, to help encourage those questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event's over, we're going to look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, folks, let's get to the main event. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today: Stephen New, Director of BCDR for DataPrise; Emily Tellez, Product Strategy Technologist with Veeam; and Stephanie Hamrick, Marketing Manager with DataPrise. So, Stephanie, you're going to be leading this today, so the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Keith. We're thrilled to be here, and thank you everybody for joining us for this session. Like Keith mentioned, I'm a marketing manager here at DataPrise, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about DataPrise for those who don't know us, and then I'll cover our agenda. DataPrise is a national managed services provider and Veeam Platinum Cloud and Services provider. We have been providing services end-to-end for our clients across the United States since 1995. We believe technology should enable you to be the best at what you do, and so we deliver best-in-class managed disaster recovery and data protection, cybersecurity, network, infrastructure, collaboration, and end-user solutions to help you get there. So let me share a little bit about what's in store today. First, we're going to cover the latest trends in ransomware from Veeam's 2024 Ransomware Report. Then we'll talk about proactive strategies to mitigate risks from ransomware and how disaster recovery as a service and continuous data protection fit into a true cyber resiliency strategy. And then we'll wrap up with 5 key takeaways from our experts here with some time for questions. Keith already handled the intros of those experts, so with that, we'll move into our first section here, which is discussing the cyber landscape. And I'll hand it over to Emily to talk about what the cyber landscape looks like when it comes to ransomware and data outages.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, so to kick us all off, right? And so we're going to jump into the Veeam Ransomware 2024 Trends Report. But before that, we're going to start off with just some high-level statistics. Now, this statistic comes from our Data Protection Trends Report that showcased or came out earlier this year. And essentially what Veeam does is we actually work with third parties so that way we can gather unbiased opinions of over 10,000 organizations worldwide, right? So this allows us to be able to get feedback from different types of users, not necessarily those that are specifically those that are not Veeam customers, right? So these are all users that aren't using Veeam, right? But they're going through the process of either looking at evaluating different types of technologies, or maybe even those that have actually gone through a ransomware or cyber threat event. So when we first kind of kick this off, this is just pulling information from that Data Protection Trends Report. And so one of those questions that we asked those users was, did you suffer an event within the past 12 months? So in 2023, has your organization suffered an attack? And so you could see here that 75% of those respondents actually said yes, that they had suffered at least one attack within 2023. But probably what's more staggering here is that you see that 25% had actually said that they didn't have any type of incident take place, yet more were hit quarterly versus those that weren't hit at all. So you have a likelihood of being hit more than once versus not at all when it comes to a cyber threat or a ransomware event. So just some really fascinating statistics here that we see. And one thing that I always like to point out, right, that just because they answered 25% saying none doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't eventually have one, right? Because we all know with dwell time, and Stephen and I are actually going to talk a little bit about that further, is, sometimes ransomware doesn't really show its face until, after a couple of months. So the dwell time in there could have been that they had some type of bad actor within their environment, but they just didn't know it yet. So this is where a lot of that research from Veeam comes through, right? Is we're wanting to learn, what everybody is doing, how are people getting prepared for when these events happen, because it's no longer an if, it's a when, and what can we do from a strategic partnership with DataPrice to ensure that everybody is better prepared for that eventual attack. Now, the follow-up question to this was also, what were some of the additional outages that could possibly cause some type of data loss event within your organization? Now, as we all know, obviously cyber is top of mind for everybody, right? You could see here that the cybersecurity event was absolutely number one, something that took down the organization that probably had the most impact on being able to drive business forward, get people access to different services, right? So we're very, very familiar with that. But the other thing that I like to point out here is everything else: infrastructure, networking outages, storage hardware, application changes or upgrades. These are all common things that we do on our day-to-day basis that we still have to be prepared for that could cause some type of outage. So even though we might have tunnel vision, and as of today, we're going to be focusing a lot on ransomware, we still have to be thinking about all those other things that go into running a business and making a data center, the best that it can be. And I think that's where DataPrize is definitely going to be able to come in here. So, Stephen, you have the expertise in this because you help customers day in and day out with their BCDR strategy. What are some things in here that you could probably point out and share with those on the call with us today?
Well, like you mentioned, Emily, it's not if, it's when you get attacked. So that's one of the biggest things that we emphasize to our customers, that, cybersecurity is our number one priority, and backups and cybersecurity go hand in hand. Most of the customers that we've seen get hit If they didn't have backups, they would no longer be in business today. That's just fact. So backups has saved more than one business that we support. I mean, we've had customers that we'll probably go into this in a little detail later, but just 3 weeks ago, we had a customer that got hit by Medusa, and it encrypted every single one of their servers. So without their backups, and in the Dataprise cloud using Cloud Connect by Veeam, they would essentially be out of business today. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even if we were to take a look at even this slide, right? If we thinking about 4 or more attacks happening over the year, and if you think the average dwell time or the average cost of an outage is usually around 3.5 weeks, well, now we're looking at maybe possibly somebody spending the majority of their year or a good quarter of the year just essentially getting back up from an incident, which could be very powerful. But especially when we start thinking about these different types of strategies that we need to have in place, and why it's so important to have a secondary backup, something that's secure, but then also having a provider that's going to be able to be there with you when you need it the most during those situations and those outages that could have you really better prepared. So let's go into an analysis of the attack. So this is where we're going to start getting into a lot of the data points from the Ransomware Trends Report. So the Ransomware Trends 2024 report actually was released earlier this month. So we highlighted it at our Veeam On, which is our large conference that takes place every year. This year it was in Fort Lauderdale. And some of the numbers or the percentages that we get from these to me, is always, it's a real eye-opener, but it's also very helpful, especially because we've been running these research projects for so long now. So we're able to see across multitude of years how people have either better prepared themselves or what changes they made in their environment. So it's always good to be able to go back and revisit some of these data points. But from one of those data points we were able to capture is that you should plan on losing 18% of your production data when it comes to a cyber incident. So when we asked them, how much of your data was actually affected when you got hit by your cyber threat, it was 41% of those respondents said that they had their production data affected. Out of that 41%, 57% of that data was actually recoverable. So this is where we make up that gap of 18% of production data not being recoverable. So when we start thinking that in terms of your most, specific applications that probably have the most highest importance within your organization, 18% could mean 100% for certain types of application owners, right? It could mean 100% for different types of users, depending on what's inside of that data. So it's a pretty big percentage to be thinking about, and things that you need to be prepared for when it comes to a ransomware event. I guess, Stephen, from your perspective, do these numbers, do they scare you at all, or are you, what are your thought processes here? Is that what you've seen in your field?
Well, Emily, my response is we obviously want to lose 0% of your data. That's our goal at the end of the day, because that 18%, what do you don't want to lose something critical as part of that 18% that you rely on. That 18% could include, your production SQL server, so your QuickBooks server, any financial software, your payroll data. So at the end of the day, Dataprise's business continuity disaster recovery team, our goal is 0%. And that's why we partnered with the best backup vendor, Veeam, to provide protection to our customers, because at the end of the day, we know the product's reliable and it will help us achieve that goal of not losing any customer data. But yeah, to answer your question, 18% is roughly around what customers should should count into the numbers to lose. But as a backup provider, we set the bar a little bit higher, and we try to go to zero.
Absolutely. And I think the plan for getting customers from that 18 to 0 or to the 0 overall, right? It comes into the different types of strategies that they want to have in place. So one of those strategies that we like to highlight, right, is early detection. I mean, at the end of the day, there's not a magic bullet. And number one, I should have probably prefaced this with these statistics. We're not trying to scare anybody here, right? What we're trying to do is just make sure that everybody's aware that these are real customer live events that have happened, and this is what we were able to capture from that data set. So the only way that you can be better prepared for this event is to practice and to know about it. So from that standpoint, when we start getting into strategies and what you can do to be better prepared to get you to that 0%, number one is early detection, right? Backup alone is not going to be enough. Sometimes it is the only option, but it shouldn't be the only option, right? We have to look at having a layered defense when it comes to being better prepared for cyber events, and especially having kind of like that defense in-depth strategy to help us to remediate any of those situations as fast as possible. So when we start looking at early detection, right, we want to make sure your backups are going to be reliable, because there's nothing worse than relying on a backup and then realizing that that backup is no longer viable when you need it the most. Monitoring, running analytics in real time, looking into the production environment, seeing when there might be possible issues that arise, doing a deep scan, as well as doing integrations with even your SIM tools, as well as leveraging endpoint detection, and then making sure that that's all easy to use, scalable, and it's going to work better together all throughout. Now, I know DataPrise, for example, you all not only leverage what Veeam has available from an early detection perspective, but you also add on additional sets that gives you some additional layered for responses, right? Steven, do you want to talk a little bit about what DataPrise has available and that can offer on top of what Veeam is doing?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So DataPrise, the first thing you need is you need a robust cybersecurity program or cyber program in place. These days, backup is not enough, as you mentioned. So if you do not have a robust cybersecurity in place and or a 24-hour SOC monitoring your SIM, you can easily let bad actors get into your network. And once they're into your network, it's essentially a done deal. It's like Christmas to the cyber criminals. Once they get into your network, they plant, bad stuff all over the place, and you can't really detect it by yourself without having a robust cybersecurity program. And that's where DataPrise plays a role. Being our customers all-in-one IT provider, we have the ability to provide them not only with the best backups they can get, but also a robust cybersecurity program. Customers also need to perform a business impact analysis. The reason for this is you need to identify any critical assets or any processes, and not only assets and processes, you also need to determine any key stakeholders that need to be involved in these processes. So you need to have this all documented in a detailed business impact analysis. And during this analysis, which can be done by DataPrise's PMO department or a professional services team. They also determine your recovery time objectives and your both RPOs and RTOs. Recovery point objective, recovery time objective. Say that 15 times real fast. We determine all that. So essentially, at the end of the day, doing a business impact analysis will determine how much risk your company can tolerate. And what I mean by that, are you going to be losing $1 million if you're down? If you're going to be losing $2 million? So these are all factors that we look at whenever a BIA or a business impact analysis is created. The last thing that you want to do is you want to have a BCDR plan in place. You also want to test this BCDR plan. The reason for this is because you got to be prepared. Time is money here. So when you first get triggered by an attack or you first have a hardware failure, at the end of the day, every second counts. Those seconds depend on if one system's impacted or 50 systems are impacted. So you need to have a detailed BCDR plan in place. You need to be prepared to move quickly in the case of an attack. And then you also need to have defined roles, processes, timelines. You need to make sure that, Joe from cyber is handling XYZ task and Mike from IT is handling this task. So you need to coordinate all these in your BCDR plan and make sure that everybody knows their assigned role and is able to understand the process and understand that this is a time-sensitive matter. Lastly, you need to test your backups. We all know that. The very last thing that you want to do is go into a live event not testing your backups, hoping that it works. Not only do you need to test your backups, you need to follow your BCDR plan that you have in place, because this is essentially your run book for the disaster. So you start at page 1, you go through your run book, and if everything is documented sufficiently and everybody knows their roles, the processes, the timelines, then it will be, I'm not going to say a piece of cake because no disaster is a piece of cake, but you will be prepared in the event of any disaster, be it a tornado, a cyber attack, a hurricane, and Dataprise will be there with you every step of the way.
Yeah, I think you and I could probably spend all day on just this slide alone. So a few key things I want to just point out there that you mentioned, Stephen. So number one, right? Yeah, no disaster event is ever going to be a walk in the park or a piece of cake for all of us, right? There's different emotions that are in place there. There's different types of mentalities. Number one, let's just, we take cyber into it, right? A cyber threat or a ransomware event never happens on a Wednesday afternoon when, it's a pretty slow day and there's nothing else to do, right? It usually happens on the Christmas Eve, the New Year's Eve, right before Thanksgiving, when there's some type of, possibly a long weekend or a vacation in event where people know that they're not going to have the most available users in the office that will be able to react right away. But then on top of that, right, that the bad actors know that they have a way that they can possibly slow down your options for being able to recover as quick as possible. The second thing that I wanted to pick up is that BIA. So one thing you might have noticed Stephen mentioned, right, is the BIA is what sets your RPOs and your RTOs, or if we want to change the RPO, RTO, just say your SLA, right? So how fast can you recover? How long is it going to take for you to recover? This is really something that has to be decided from the business. So this has to have your business leadership needs to be involved. They need to be the ones that are going to say, yes, this is what our SLA is going to be for these applications or for how we continue to generate revenue or offer services to our customers. It's in no way, shape, or form should be reliant on what your technology is providing you, because sometimes the technology might not be the SLA that is needed for the business, or maybe even the technology is generating a great SLA and it's very expensive on the business, right? So those BIAs really do need to be leveraged. And if you haven't done a business impact analysis before, I highly recommend it. Obviously, we're partnered here with Dataprise for a reason, so I'm sure they could also walk you through what that looks like, but it's getting all of your business leaders in a room. You're no longer relying on an application owner saying our stuff is the most important. It's no, what's the most important for the business? that continues to keep us online and being able to offer services to our customers. So it really does take that position out of it. So just two things that I like to always highlight here is the BIAs, and then of course, talking about better documentation and BCDR planning. We do have a question in here. So one of those questions was, let me actually scroll down. It was, how often should IT and security teams be testing their backups and checking if the backup is validated and has no errors? It's a great question. Stephen, I'm going to answer and say that you should be doing this as often as possible, right? You shouldn't be waiting a year to test your backups or to test your BCDR plan. But Stephen, I'm going to go ahead and let you, like, what does DataPrise recommend to your customers as far as how they should be testing their backups and how often?
So DataPrise recommends that you test your backups, and this is in most of our agreements that you should test them every quarter. DataPrise does do a quarterly test where we spin up your VMs, and we do make sure that they do come to control and delete. We do a full DR simulation event once a year to make sure that you can connect to, kick your tires. What we like to say during the DR event, go to Starbucks, go to McDonald's, get off your company network and test every single application that you can. But just a simple little file restore is all you really need to make sure that your backups are functioning properly. You can go the extra mile and bring it up into instant recovery to make sure it boosts the control delete, which is what we do for our customers as part of our quarterly test, which we do 3 a year. We do one hands-on test a year. So to answer your question, Emily, 4 times a year, and we prefer that you do it every single quarter. Also, if you make any major changes to your environment, you add, you remove servers, it's good to test them then too. Because as I mentioned, you don't want to go into a DR event hoping that it works. So you want to make sure if you make a change, like remove a server, add a server, you test those new products to make sure that those are part of not only the BCDR plan, but they do function as expected.
Fantastic. Awesome. Yeah, I always love hearing what our partners are offering in terms of your recommendations for testing, right? So follow up from that. So let's just talk about overall strategies for proactive protection for the data backup. So we mentioned earlier that, we do some proactive monitoring and analytics to ensure that the data is going to be available and viable for recovery. But let's talk about what some of the other enhanced data protection offerings that DataPrise has available.
Sure. So some of the proactive protection that we have for customers is our proprietary technology, which is enhanced data protection. That's a gapped copy of the backup files that's outside of the customer's repository, or so the customer doesn't have access to them, because we all know if the customer has access to the tenant, then the bad stuff they get in their environment can have access to those files, which we keep those outside of the customer's repositories. We also build our tests from this data as well. The reason for that is because we get functionality of verifying the EDP data works, and we also verify that the customer can build and allow them to do their test from the EDP data. So we essentially knock out 2 or check off 2 boxes during that process. Something new that we just recently launched back in January, and it's funny, Emily, because we actually learned about this from Veeam product management when we were at the V100 summit in Prague. That continuous data protection is now available without Recovery Orchestrator. You can actually send it directly to Hardware Planning Cloud Connect, which as soon as we found out about that, at the Veeam 100 Summit, we hit the ground running with this product, and we were able to develop it and get it ready and functioning before Christmas. And then we started releasing it and marketing it just after January. So continuous data protection does go to one of our replication servers, and it's a real-time data replication that can get your recovery point objects or your RPO and RTOs down to below, we're going to say at 5 minutes, but I mean, to be completely honest, that depends on the customer's back-end switching network, their bandwidth. The internal test that I've done in my dev lab, we can get well under a minute.
Wow.
But keep in mind that the contracted RPO and RTO would be 5 minutes, but depending on the customer's back end, that could be a lot quicker. And what that does is, let's say the customer loses a SAN. That is continuous real live replication of a server that detects the changes at a VM level and sends those to us. And if the server were to go down, all that they would have to do is just fail that server over and power it up in our VMware, our DR replication environment, and it would create a VPN tunnel between the customer's network and our DR side. And then the customer could be up and running. Let's just say that, people do advertise 15 minutes, but between me and you, Emily, we know that it takes as long as that server boots. So It powers on, it boots up. If your server takes 15 minutes to boot, then it'll take 15 minutes. But essentially, as soon as you fill it over, it'll power on.
Yeah, awesome. And, and there's, so again, just some things in there we want to be able to highlight, right? So for those of you that are watching this live, right? So when we start throwing out these different types of acronyms, I know I saw a question in there for define BCDR, right? To us, that's business continuity and disaster recovery. Sometimes they could be synonymous. Sometimes they could be completely different, right? What helps a business continue to be able to offer their services, and then what's true disaster recovery, meaning that we had natural disaster, a cyber event, or some accidental deletion that was performed by end user. And so now we have end user error, right? Those all qualify as a DR event that could possibly have a large impact to the business. So when we're saying BCDR, we're just grouping those two items together. And then Stephen, to your point, right? The repositories, this is, we're going to hit on this again, but a repository is just a backup target. Where are you going to be storing your backups? And for us, it's ensuring that you're keeping a backup offline, off-site, so that way you're able to be better prepared for any type of data loss event. So not just a cyber event where, now they have access to your systems and they encrypt all your files, but also those fires, there's floods. I've had customers that have had issues with, power and have had outages due to a hurricane. So thinking about having true offsite capabilities and having that data so that way they can leverage it to rebuild either at a secondary DR location if they have it, or if they don't, leveraging those providers like Dataprise that can offer your services to be able to help them get back up and running. And then the continuous data protection is something that's available within Veeam. So super excited that we're able to bring that to, of course, our Veeam service providers. But there's just different ways that we can replicate and get data offsite, and whether that's going to be replication based, where we have a one-to-one VM ready to go and stand up in a moment's notice, or if that's leveraging a backup file and recovering from that backup file. It's just two different level sets of SLAs, and also just, again, to Stephen's point, things that we have to think about from a bandwidth networking perspective for getting that data to the secondary location. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about those business impacts and what some of these users might have seen from when they were hit from a cyber event. So this is probably one of those unique slides where we ask, okay, well, what was what encompasses your entire impact from a data loss event? And one thing we like to point out here too is that the ransom is only 32% of that entire financial impact that these users had experienced from the Ransomware Trends Report, right? So 62% actually said that their overall costs were recoverable through insurance. So they're able to leverage an insurance provider if they had it at that point in time to be able to help them to pay for recuperating some of their losses. But from on top of that, right, we have to start thinking about all the other things that could possibly go wrong. So, maybe, for example, if you did pay the ransom to try to get your data back, which we find out that sometimes users have paid the ransom and they have not gotten their data back, either because of the malware that was used to actually fully corrupted the data itself. So the decryptor keys that they were sent were never going to fix the corrupted data. It was essentially just garbage at that point in time. Or they just essentially checked you off on a box and said, yep, these people are more willing to pay. So maybe we continue to negotiate this a little bit further and continue to see how much more money we can get out of them. So just thinking about overall terms of impact that users can experience, right? It's important to remember that the ransom is always being asked for a monetary perspective, but it's not going to be the only impact that's either felt from a personnel experience, hardware, getting that data back, right, in terms of how much have we lost. So just overall things that also encompass this, this estimate as well. So we're going to transition that to a little bit of some of the tales from the field. So I know, Stephen, you work with so many customers that have had this experience from ransomware. I'd like to turn it over to you to even just share maybe some of those stories. I know we heard the story about the customer that got hit by Medusa, and you guys are able to help facilitate and get them back online. But is there any others that maybe we could share here that could help some customers be better prepared for these events?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we did have the customer about 3 to 4 weeks ago. They got hit by Medusa. They were brought up in our cloud environment, and we let them run off our cloud for. You did mention this once, Emily.
Oh no! Looks like we lost Stephen.
We just got him back. DR, yeah. Normally in a DR situation, we tend to run for about 3 weeks. So the customer that was hit by Medusa, they ran in our cloud environment for 3 weeks. We also had a customer who was an architectural firm that they were a worldwide company, and they got hit last year. And then not even probably 6 weeks ago, the attack was re-triggered because the systems weren't cleaned, and they re-triggered the attack and encrypted all their systems again. The company came to us the first time regarding they had to have payroll done by 10 a.m. They reached out to us at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, hey, I just got hit by ransomware. My employees aren't going to get paid if you don't help me. So we were able to get them up. We were able to meet that deadline, and their employees got paid that day. So those are two successful stories that we recovered from, and both of those were used. We are an all Veeam provider. So any of our backup stories, you can pretty much guarantee that it is Veeam that was the reason why those customers were successful.
Yeah. And I think, the clear thing there too, right, is the clean portion of it, right? So how do we ensure that data is going to be clean to ensure we don't have a secondary attack? But then on top of that, what tools do we utilize to help us? And then it leads into our next question, which is, who else do we involve when it comes to remediation, for ransomware? So this, again, ransomware trends, organizational alignment, who are the third parties that you involved during remediation? So a question that was asked was, did your organization engage any third parties as part of remediating during the ransomware event, right? So number 1 and number 2 are pretty close, as well as number 3, right? We can probably lump those all together as almost tied, as the security vendor, the backup vendor, as well as the security specialist for forensics. Those were all the top 3 third parties that were involved during remediation. So think about that for those of you that are online, right? When you're going through that event, who are going to be the top people that you're going to be initiating a call to or an email to help you when it comes to getting your data back and getting back online. Number 4 is no surprise, a service provider or a reseller or partner. So someone like DataPrise that could come in with that expertise that has gone through many different types of events and many different types of attacks, that can offer those services to help those organizations get back up and running as quick as possible. And then, of course, we have our law enforcement, ransomware negotiator, other government resources, and only 6% said that they did not engage any third party during remediation. So the one thing I just like to point out here for those of you that are online, if you're building out your business continuity and disaster recovery strategy, and you are documenting what that process is going to look like, don't forget to document the people that you're going to be engaging with, because as we all know, when you're going through one of these actual events yourselves, you definitely want to make sure that you have all the right people that are in place to help you to get back to work faster. So engage and make sure that you have those people documented, so that way it makes it a little bit more easier for you to be able to reach out to. Or if you're the one person that knows who you need to reach out to and you end up being on vacation or unreachable, and now somebody else has to do that job, they at least know who they can go ahead and contact, and that's been all fully documented for them. So just a good word of advice there. So let's go ahead and let's get into the recovery portion of it. So protecting your backups and plan for new servers is going to be the key item here that we want everybody to take away. So as part of the Ransomware Trends Report, 96% of those respondents said that their backup repositories or their backup targets were targeted during the attack. So 96% targeted, 76% of those were affected. So think about that when it comes to having a highly resilient strategy. So only having one set of backups is probably not the best case. Not leveraging different technologies like immutability, or not leveraging technologies like tape or cloud, things that can get that data set offline is going to be key here, right? Because as you can see here, almost all the threat actors attempted to modify or delete those backups because they know that that's where you're going to be your first game plan for trying to go through and recover your data set. The other portion of this is very key. 31% of hardware was not able to be wiped or restored. So if your plan is to just wipe your entire environment and then just start over from scratch, leveraging your backups, keep in mind that 31% of those respondents said that they weren't able to do that. So either due to forensic investigation or due to cleaning, whatever it may be, they weren't able to leverage their already invested infrastructure to be able to recover or to build their environment back up. So again, plan to leverage a provider like DataPrise that can offer that secondary set of services or infrastructure to be able to get your data back up and running. And that leads into the backup strategy. So Stephen, I think this is where you guys come in with having that air-gapped, offline, truly immutable copy for customers from a backup. But do you want to take us through what the 3-2-1-1-0 backup strategy is and how customers can achieve that?
Yeah, sure. So as we call it the zip code in the backup land. So you want 3 different copies of your data. You want the primary copy. You want a copy that is either local or in the cloud. You also want it on 2 different types of media. So you want it either locally or in the cloud or on tape. which would also qualify for the one off-site copy, or would count as the two different types of media. You also want one off-site. That way, if you do have, let's be honest, at the end of the day, cyber insurance is an insurance company. They're going to want to come in and inspect your network. And sometimes they put holds on the infrastructure. So you want one copy off-site, because while they investigate the damage to your environment, you're not going to be able to restore anything. Like you mentioned during your last slide, 31%, they couldn't do anything yet. So that's why it's good to partner with a company like Dataprise, who does have the cloud environment where we can bring that one off-site copy up and allow you to work while the investigation's ongoing by your insurance company. You also want one that is immutable or air gap. The reason for that is because as technology increases, backup is becoming more important, especially to the bad actors. And the first thing that is normally targeted is the backup repository. So if you have a offline or air gapped or immutable copy, the attackers cannot get to that data. We also want to throw in some zero trust strategies here. So that was a big topic at Veeam that Emily and I both attended, is zero trust. You don't want anybody to be able to get to those backups. So that's another important one. And you want to make sure there's no errors after your backups. And you want to make sure that during the testing, you have no errors and everything is recovered and verified that you can access everything. So not only are the backups important, but the zero is important as well, to make sure you don't have any errors and everything is recoverable.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think, we had a question earlier about, when it comes to organizations choosing a proper data protection or backup solution, what should be addressed to choose that solution? I mean, and this is it right here, right? It's choosing a vendor or choosing a partner that can ensure that you're able to hit this type of strategy, where they're going to be able to allow you to have those different, two different copies of your backups being stored on two different types of media, ensuring that it's truly offsite, offline, air gapped, or immutable. So that way that, if something were to happen in any type of data loss event, that you have a backup that is recoverable or restorable. And then on top of that, that they're providing that validation of automating the testing and ensuring that that backup is going to be fully recoverable. Because again, everybody can do a backup. Recovery is always going to be the hardest part. So if you choose a backup vendor, you want to choose one that's going to make that automation of the testing, verifying full recovery, the easiest for you, because you don't want to have to find that out during a true data loss event. So when we get into some of those recovery options, right? Outages occur. We want to ensure that you have the most available recovery options available to you. So this is something that, Veeam has been providing for a very long time for customers. That one single backup has over 100 different types of restore options. So whether that's going to be a full VM recovery, which we pioneered with instant VM recovery, or if we want to start looking at recovering at a granular basis, which in some cases, I've actually done this with customers where they weren't able to recover the full image itself, but they were able to recover the files, and the files was the most important piece of that asset. So for them, being able to pull out those files or those folders was the best situation for them versus trying to just do the entire image itself. So having that functionality, having the flexibility to recover the data how you want it, when you want it, is going to be key here. And that's also going to be very important for when you're selecting a backup vendor or backup solution that you want to leverage. Cloud mobility. Stephen, you mentioned having customers that needed to move their data or having to recover that data inside a Dataprise environment. That is absolutely true. So one of the things that Veeam does actually focus on is data freedom, being able to have that full mobility of taking a backup and spinning it up wherever you need it to be, right? So that's going to be running inside of Azure, AWS, Google, or for one instance, I worked with a customer that converted their physical servers into virtual. That is stuff that Veeam can do that can help, and I'm sure Dataprise can also help with that strategy as well. So we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to ensure that we got to all of the questions as well as some of the key items and takeaways for everybody that's able to join today. So we're going to end with just a quick summary because A, I don't expect everybody to remember all of those statistics from the Ransomware Trends or Data Protection Trends Report. But B, we definitely want to ensure that, that these things stay top of mind for all of you. So top 5 takeaways. Number 1, it's not an if, but when you'll experience an attack. So when it comes to being prepared for a ransomware or cyber threat, you need to practice. Practice is going to help you to ensure that you're going to have the best recovery options available. And to Stephen's point earlier, right? It's not going to be a cakewalk, but it's going to at least ensure that you're going to have the least amount of errors possible during that attempt to recover your environment. Practice is key here. Everybody should be testing and validating your backups, but you should be practicing your recovery scenarios for when you need to be better prepared for a BC or DR event. Number 2 is you are not alone. There's experts here to help. So obviously Dataprise is here. Stephen has gone through numerous different types of events with customers, and they're relied upon to help those customers to get back up and running as quick as possible. So leverage them, leverage your backup vendor, leverage your security vendor. This isn't a single hero type of event, right? We want to make sure that you're pulling all your resources together so that way you can get the best outcome available. Number 3, always prepare for the worst, right? You don't want to prepare for a file server or for a small upgrade or outage to be that. You want to prepare for what's the worst thing that can happen if our entire data center was no longer available, because that's going to truly ensure that you have the best plan in place. And then when you have that strategy or you have that plan, you need to validate it. Don't say that our SLAs are 15 minutes or an hour or a few days. Validate those and ensure that the technology vendor that you've chosen can meet those, but then also that the business has agreed upon those SLAs as well. And then finally, recovery is your last line. So if you're not validating, you're not testing, then that recovery can no longer be your last line of defense against ransomware. Anything else that you want to add here, Stephen? I know we have a QR code for our Dataprise, so that way customers can reach out to you for those that are online.
No, I think you hit all the points we're trying to make here, Emily. I mean, I just want to emphasize number 2, you're not here alone. The Dataprise Business Continuity Disaster Recovery team will be there every step of the way. If needed, we'll be on the phone with you every step of the way. You're not in this alone. We'll be there to help you.
Awesome. Perfect. So Keith, I think we could turn it back over to you, or what we could do is we could dive into some of the questions that are here.
Hi, Emily. Actually, you guys had so much good information today that we have run out of time. You had so much to talk about, but one of the advantages is you did go through questions while you were going through the presentation itself. So we did get a lot of questions answered. And I would also mention that any questions that didn't get answered during the event today, that both Dataprise and Veeam will be following up with those who asked the question. So have no fear. If you didn't get your question answered live, you will be hearing from both companies. But I want to thank you, Emily and Stephen and Stephanie, for a fantastic presentation today. Ransomware remains top of mind for all of us. It's not going away, as all those statistics that you had there demonstrates so clearly. It's still keeping admins awake at night, but there are solutions. There are ways to deal with it, and we've learned a lot about that today. So I want to thank all of you for being on with you and for educating us on what DataPrise and Veeam are doing with all this. Thanks so much, folks. All right. So what I am going to do now, everyone, we are just about out of here. I just have one duty left, and that is the really fun part, and that is giving away the gift card. So $250 Amazon gift card, as I said at the top, and you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win. And we do have a winner for today. The winner of the $250 gift card is Chris Gibbs from Kentucky. Congratulations to you, Chris. We will be in touch ASAP to get you your card. And with that, folks, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank DataPrise and Veeam again for making this event possible. And thanks to you attendees, as always, for being here, for your great questions, for your interest in this topic. I learned so much today, and I hope you did as well. And we can't wait to see you in the next event. So that wraps us for today, folks. Have a great rest of your day.